on social media this week. Now, joining me in studio is Matiba Sibanyoni from the SABC Digital news team. Thanks for joining me.
Pleasure.
Now, let's start off with earlier in the week. We had Reconciliation Day. How were the trending topics around that?
Well, it's been a very, very busy week, especially for a week where there's a holiday. Social media has been trending really high. Obviously, on Wednesday, the Reconciliation Day was trending. But for the first time in a long time, the trend had mixed emotions. You know, back in the day, a few years back, people would be like, yes, let's get together, let's reconcile, everything is great, there are things we need to fix. But this time around, there was some division, some unity within people that you wouldn't think there would be unity. Which brings us to the Zuma Must Fall
Yeah, that
trend.
was massive.
It was. It started
It still is.
It is. It actually still is, surprisingly so. Reconciliation Day trended that day and the day after. Okay. But for some reason, it was still much, much lower compared to the Zuma Must Fall March trend. If you see over there on the screen, you'll see that there was EFF who went out and did commemorated ANC, DA, so different parties. But there were also people who didn't belong to any particular parties who just wanted to come out and say, hey, this is how we feel. And so that trickles down to Zuma Must Fall March, which happened also on the 16th of this month. And there were a lot of different cultures who went out to say Zuma Must Fall. But the funny thing is that this trend was on social media where people were saying, let's sign petitions. So you kind of get a feeling of South Africans who have access to social media and how they feel about certain issues. But we're still kind of a bit unsure about people who aren't on social media, for example.
But I actually want to touch on that. You've just mentioned that people had been signing petitions, and these petitions are generally posted on Facebook. How do you explain the contrast between Twitter and Facebook users? Do you think the sentiments, specifically on Reconciliation Day, but also with the Zuma Must Fall protest, do you think the sentiments were identical, or could you see the differences? Because I do know that the Twitter user is not necessarily the Facebook user, for example.
Exactly. When you generally look at news, when you look at Facebook is more about communities. So if you go onto Facebook and look at any posts, chances are you'll find posts where people within the same party will be commenting about the same issues. But when Twitter comes in, Twitter isn't about that. It's more about the individual, what the individual says, what they want, and whatever influence they can give to the rest. Either they'll be followed by other people who will be like, oh, I also believe in that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they belong to the same cultural background, the same community, the same political groups. So you get those two differences. But this year, for example, if you went on Facebook, yes, there were there was a lot of humor, funny enough, around the Zuma Must Fall March and everything that had happened over the past week. But same applied. If you go on Twitter, you find different people from different places saying, okay, this is what we want, this is not what we want. And a lot of debate as well, as opposed to Facebook, where you find people from similar communities. Now and then you find someone coming in to say, I oppose what you're saying. But then that's usually shut down because it's communities and they generally believe in more or less the same thing. So that's basically the trend. The Zuma Must Fall March trend is still trending to this day. And you must remember, this started trending way before Reconciliation Day. So we're still watching. It pops up in the top 10, goes off, pops in, pops up. So people are still talking about it. But as I said before, social media, most South Africans are not on social media. And so as much as we get a sense of what South Africans are saying, it also lives that gap.
It's actually not accurate. That makes a lot of sense, because if the majority of the country is not on social media, that means that the things that are trending are not necessarily the sentiments of the average South African. That's actually quite interesting.
Know for sure.
Yeah. But something that we can't ignore are those memes. They are hilarious. The memes about Van Rooyen. Take us through that. I mean, those have been so funny.
There were a lot of memes about Van Rooyen. You can't ignore the first time that it was announced that Van Rooyen was going to be the Minister of Finance. Some people thought he was a white man. We live in South Africa now, where you can find a black person having an African surname, or even if you're not necessarily mixed, you could have a different surname, you know? So that was the first thing that came about, and the shock, and that when people realized that, oh, this is not who we thought he was. And it was followed by a lot of humor within this very, very, very serious situation. And then there were memes about Nene and the horror of realizing that he had lost his job. And people found that funny. But then moving on to this kind of discussions, yes, there was humor, it was funny, people were also very upset and angry, and there were very important views that came that need to be taken into consideration that were on social media. But this also, as soon as that announcement was made about Nene not being minister anymore, it had an effect. The rent went down, it trickled down. That was something we couldn't ignore. The international community was on social media as well, talking about the rand, and it also brought. I remember people asking, "Does social media have is the rand trickling because of what people on social media are saying, or is the rand trickling because of the actual event that happened?" And that's still the big question.
I guess it shows you the contrast between the serious issues and a little bit of humor, which keeps us sane. Now, finally, Star Wars.
Yes.
It's massive. There's a craze. I'm going to admit that I don't know much about Star Wars. I've never been into that whole thing.
Yes.
I think I'm like the Harry Potter generation, more that side.
Yes.
But tell us about that trending topic.
It's
just
amazing.
quickly.
So Star Wars opened in cinemas this week after a long time of waiting, and this is an international trend, not just South Africa, where people from all over the world are posting pictures dressed in costumes. It's actually a very happy event. What happened on social media a few days before it opened in cinema is a lot of Star Wars fans saying that don't go on social media. There's a lot of spoiler alerts on it, so you're not going to enjoy the movie if you go into social media. But then that also made the social media trend explode even more. So you find pictures, really cool pictures of people dressing their babies in in costumes. They're pets, they're like puppies, cats, all kinds of things. And there's some apps that enable you to actually make customized avatars on social media. Where
you're so excited about the movie. I think the FOMO has caught me, so I will definitely go and watch and I'll give you a review. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
That was senior multimedia producer Matiba Sibanyoni joining us and letting us know about the trending topics this week. Now, after the break, we bring you all your sporting action. Don't go away.